the grand auditorium of NYU Stern buzzed with excitement. Students from across the nation gathered, their eyes wide with anticipation. The annual leadership seminar had always attracted prominent figures, but this year, the excitement was palpable. News had spread like wildfire that Barron Trump, the youngest son of President Donald Trump, was set to speak. The air crackled with curiosity. Barron had never been a typical public figure. Unlike his older siblings, who had occasionally appeared in the spotlight, Barron had always maintained a quieter, more reserved presence. His preference for staying out of the media frenzy had been a hallmark of his life. But this event was different. This wasn't a speech given by a political figure or business magnate. It was a speech by a young man who had grown up in the public eye and whose words carried the weight of his family's legacy. But it was also about something more personal. A story that no one expected as the room filled. Whispers of who would accompany Barron on stage swirled. Would his father join him? Perhaps his mother, Melania Trump, would make an appearance. But as the lights dimmed and the audience settled into silence, Barron stepped up to the podium alone. His presence was almost haunting. At just 19 years old, Barron stood tall, his poise and composure reminding many of his father, but his gaze was different. There was something more introspective, more vulnerable in his eyes. The screen behind him flickered to life, showing a photo of a much younger Barron, his mother, and his father on a family vacation. It was a simple photo, nothing extravagant, but it told a story of love and unity, something that had often been overshadowed by the whirlwind of political events that had followed them for years. Barron took a deep breath. The room was waiting. This wasn't the typical lecture on business strategy or leadership. The buzz in the room had been replaced by an almost reverent silence. Barron began to speak. "Good evening, everyone," he started, his voice steady, but soft. "I'm honored to be here today, not as the son of a politician, but as someone who has lived through experiences that many of you might never understand. This speech is not about politics. It's about family, about love, and about the incredible woman who has shaped me into the person I am today. My mother, Melania Trump." The crowd shifted, murmuring among themselves. No one had expected Barron to open with such a personal statement. For a brief moment, the audience felt the weight of his words, and a sense of curiosity swept through the room. Barron paused for a second, letting the silence settle. "My mother has always been there for me, in ways that no one could truly understand. She has been my rock, my anchor, and she's been through so much. Just like any mother, but even more so because of who we are, because of the constant scrutiny that comes with being in the public eye." His gaze turned to the floor, as if lost in thought for a moment. "Growing up, I saw my mother go through so many challenges. She wasn't just the first lady. She wasn't just the wife of a president. She was a woman who had to prove herself time and time again, not just to the world, but to herself." There was a brief pause. Barron lifted his eyes, scanning the crowd. He could feel the weight of their attention on him. And she did it all with grace. The crowd was still. Every word Barron spoke seemed to hit harder than the last. The fact that this young man, who had grown up with the entire world watching him, could stand here and speak so frankly about his mother was unexpected. There was an honesty in his voice that rang clear and true, and it made everyone listen even more intently that he continued, his voice gaining strength. "It wasn't always easy for her. There were days when I saw her come home after a long day, her eyes tired but her smile still there for me. She never let me see her break, never let me feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. I think a lot of people don't realize how much she gave up, how much she sacrificed just to be a good mother." The crowd was rapt, hanging on every word. Barron had always been seen as the quiet one, the kid who stayed out of the limelight. But tonight, he was captivating, pulling them into a world they never expected to see, into a life that few had ever truly understood. Barron's voice softened as he spoke about his mother's journey, and the room seemed to lean in, hanging on to every word. It was clear that this wasn't just a tribute to Melania Trump as the former First Lady, nor was it simply a glimpse into the life of Barron Trump himself. It was something deeper, a connection between a mother and a son, forged in private moments and struggles that the public could never truly understand. My mom wasn't born into the life that she ended up living, Barron continued. She grew up in a small town in Slovenia, where nothing was handed to her. She came to this country with dreams of her own, and she worked tirelessly to make those dreams come true. And even when she achieved success in her career, she never lost sight of what was important to her. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about family. There was a trace of admiration in Barron's tone, something that seemed to be both a recognition and a testament to the character of the woman who had raised him. The crowd was silent, many of them moved by the unexpected depth of Barron's words. In the White House, things weren't easy. There were constant challenges, constant criticism. And I saw how my mother handled it, Barron said, his voice steady but filled with an emotion that was palpable. People didn't see the sleepless nights she spent worrying about us, the endless headlines, the scrutiny. But through it all, she kept going. She faced it all with strength. Strength that no one can truly comprehend unless they've walked in her shoes. His gaze grew distant, as though he were looking back through time, reflecting on moments he'd lived through. "I'll never forget the day after my father's inauguration," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "The chaos, the media frenzy, the pressures. It was overwhelming for all of us. But my mom, she didn't falter. She stood tall with grace and made sure I understood the importance of staying grounded, of never letting the noise of the world drown out who we really are." Barron paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the room. "She taught me that being kind, being respectful, and being true to myself was all that mattered." There was a quiet respect in the room now, something that hadn't been there before. Barron wasn't just speaking about his mother. He was speaking about the lessons she had imparted on him, the way she had shaped his character in ways that no one could see, but that everyone could feel. His tone shifted as he began to talk more candidly about the relationship he shared with his mother. "She's always been there for me, not just as a mother, but as someone who would listen, who would comfort, who would challenge me when I needed it. I remember when I was younger, I would get upset over something trivial, and she'd look at me with such calmness and say, 'Barron, don't waste your energy on things that don't matter. Focus on what you can control. Focus on what makes you happy and what makes you a better person.'" A few students in the audience nodded, understanding the weight of Barron's words. His mother's wisdom had clearly resonated with him, shaping not just his views on life, but his actions. Barron wasn't just the son of a former president. He was a young man who had learned the importance of resilience and humility from the woman who had raised him. Barron continued, his voice unwavering. "Growing up in a family like mine, you can't help but notice the constant media attention. It's overwhelming at times, and it's not something you can ever fully prepare for. But my mom always reminded me to keep my head down and focus on the things that truly matter. The world will always talk, Barron," she would say, "but it's your heart and your actions that will define you in the end." As Barron spoke, the room grew even quieter, if that was possible. The weight of his words hung in the air. He wasn't just telling his audience about his mother's strength. He was showing them how that strength had shaped him into the young man he had become. Barron Trump, the quiet and reserved son of the most controversial president in recent history, was now standing before them, demonstrating wisdom and depth beyond his years. "My mom was more than just the First Lady," Barron said, his voice filled with pride. "She was a woman who gave up so much for us. She fought for us. She loved us fiercely. And when I look back at everything she has done for me and for this country, I can't help but feel incredibly lucky to have her as my mother." The students in the room were no longer just listening. They were reflecting, and many of them had tears in their eyes, moved by the heartfelt speech that Barron had shared. It wasn't just a speech about a public figure. It was a raw and authentic tribute to the power of family, the strength of a mother's love, and the impact of quiet resilience. As Barron's speech continued, the gravity of his words hung over the room, creating a bond between him and the audience that no one had expected. The students were captivated by the emotional transparency he displayed, a stark contrast to the political personas they were used to seeing on TV. Barron had turned what could have been a typical public appearance into an emotional testament to his mother's role in his life and it was clear that his words resonated deeply with the crowd. For Barron, this speech was more than just a tribute. It was a turning point. It was his moment to step out from the shadow of his father and speak to the world on his own terms, without the filters of political rhetoric or public scrutiny. He had decided to open up, to reveal something personal and raw, and in doing so, he wasn't just honoring his mother. He was discovering something about himself. He took a deep breath, looking around the room once again. The faces in the crowd were focused, some with tears in their eyes, others holding their breath in anticipation of what he would say next. Barron felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. He had never felt this understood by an audience before. This wasn't about fame or attention. This was about connection. And that connection had been forged through his mother's unwavering support and love. Growing up in the White House was unlike anything most people could ever imagine. Barron continued, his voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. I saw things that no child should ever have to see. My family was under constant attack, our every move scrutinized, judged, and criticized. But what people don't see, what they don't understand, is that my mom was always the one who kept us grounded, who made sure we knew what really mattered. She was always the one who reminded me that no matter what the world said, we had each other. And that was enough. The room was silent. Even the most cynical students, the ones who had come to the event with preformed opinions about the Trump family, found themselves moved by the raw emotion Barron was sharing. His words carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. This wasn't a political speech. It was a personal story of resilience, of love, and of the sacrifices his mother had made for her family. Barron paused for a moment, collecting his thoughts before continuing. I remember the days when I'd see my mom standing in the hallway of the White House, just staring out the window, lost in thought, and I'd ask her what was wrong. She would smile and say, "Nothing, Barron. Everything will be fine." But I could see the toll it was taking on her. The pressure, the constant media attention, the endless criticism. And yet, she never let it affect me. She never let it break her. And I'll never forget the sacrifices she made to make sure I felt loved and protected. For the first time in his life, Barron spoke about the real toll the public eye had taken on his mother. And as he did, something shifted in the audience. What had begun as a simple tribute to Melania Trump had turned into a deeper conversation about the human side of living in the spotlight, the toll it took on those who were often forgotten or overshadowed by the media frenzy. I want you all to understand that my mom isn't just the woman you saw on TV, Barron said, his voice filled with both pride and sadness. She's not just the former First Lady or the wife of a president. She's a woman who gave up her own dreams and aspirations to protect her family. She made countless sacrifices that most people will never know about. And every day, she wore a smile for us, for me, because that's what a mother does. There was a subtle shift in the room. Barron's words, simple yet profound, were breaking down barriers. The students, who had once seen Melania Trump only through the lens of media coverage, were now seeing her as Barron's mother, an individual who had faced immense pressure and challenges with grace and dignity. I never realized how much my mom was holding everything together until I got older, Barron continued. I was just a kid, you know? I didn't understand why people would say such terrible things about her or our family. But she would always tell me, Barron, the world doesn't know us. They only see what they want to see. But you know who we really are. And that's all that matters. Barron paused for a moment, collecting himself. She taught me that the opinions of others don't define us. Only our actions and our hearts do. The crowd was silent. Barron had done what no one expected. He had peeled back the layers of his family's public image and shown the human side of the Trumps. One that was grounded in love, sacrifice, and resilience. My mom is more than just a symbol of beauty or grace, Barron concluded, his voice stronger now. She is the embodiment of strength, and she's the reason I stand here today, speaking to all of you. Because if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be the person I am now. She taught me the importance of kindness, the value of hard work, and most importantly, the power of love. She gave me everything I needed to succeed in this world. As Barron finished speaking, there was a long, almost reverent silence in the room. For a moment, no one moved, The weight of his words had landed on the audience with such force that they were collectively processing the emotional depth of what they had just heard. Barron stood at the podium, the silence in the room still heavy, as if the entire audience was taking in the gravity of the moment. His heart raced, not from nervousness but from the depth of what he had just shared. He had spoken from a place of truth, a place that was untainted by the public's perception of his family. He had given the world a glimpse into the quiet strength of his mother, Melania Trump, and how that strength had shaped him into the person he was becoming. As Barron looked out over the sea of faces, he noticed that many students were no longer just listening. They were reflecting, some with tears in their eyes, others with expressions of awe. The connection he had forged with them was undeniable. The story he had shared wasn't just about his mother. It was about resilience, about family, and about how, in the face of public scrutiny, one can still hold on to their values and beliefs. It was a lesson that transcended politics, transcended the Trump name. The thing about my mom, Barron continued, his voice now steady but still filled with emotion, is that she never expected anyone to feel sorry for her. She never asked for sympathy. She just did her best, every single day, for our family. And when I look at the way she carried herself, even when the world was against her, I realized that her legacy isn't about being the first lady. It's about being the person who showed me that you can be kind, strong, and loving, even when the world wants to tear you down. His words hung in the air, powerful and resonant. He wasn't just talking about his mother anymore. He was talking about what his mother had passed down to him: the strength to rise above adversity, the importance of keeping one's integrity intact, and the courage to stay true to oneself, regardless of public opinion. Through all the chaos, my mom never lost herself, Barron said, his tone almost reverent. And that's something I've tried to hold on to, because when you grow up in the spotlight like I did, it's easy to lose yourself. It's easy to get caught up in what people think of you. But my mom always reminded me that what matters most is what I think of myself. She taught me to trust my instincts and to never let the opinions of others dictate my choices. The crowd was hanging on every word now, many of them completely absorbed by the personal story Barron had shared. Some students were wiping away tears, while others sat in stunned silence, processing the emotional depth of his words. This was not the Barron Trump they had expected. A quiet, reserved young man who was often hidden from the public eye. This was a Barron who had come into his own, who had found his voice and wasn't afraid to use it. Barron paused for a moment, letting the weight of his speech sink in. He knew this was a rare opportunity, one that most people would never have, especially someone in his position. The audience had expected a typical political speech, perhaps something about his father's presidency or his own aspirations. But Barron had delivered something far more personal, something that cut through the noise of politics and celebrity. He had shared a story of love, loss, and the deep bond between a mother and a son. The thing is, Barron said, his voice growing more resolute, my mom has always been about making a difference. She was never in it for herself. She wanted to help others. And the work she did as First Lady, whether it was through her Be Best initiative or her focus on children's well-being, was always about helping those who couldn't help themselves. She taught me that true strength isn't about how loud you can be or how many people you can convince. It's about how you make people feel, how you change lives for the better, even if no one ever notices. As Barron spoke those final words, the room erupted in applause. The students in the audience, many of them who had entered the room with preconceived notions about him and his family, were now standing in ovation. They weren't applauding Barron for his name or his family's political legacy. They were applauding the honesty, vulnerability, and wisdom he had shared. The applause continued, and Barron, though humbled, couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. This was the moment he had hoped for. He had shared his truth, and in doing so, he had not only honored his mother but had given the audience something to think about. Something deeper than politics. As the applause slowly died down, Barron stepped back from the podium, his chest tight with emotion. He had never spoken like this before, and he wasn't sure what to expect. But in that moment, surrounded by the applause of strangers, he felt a sense of clarity. This was who he was. This was his legacy, too. Not just the name he carried, but the values his mother had instilled in him. As he made his way off the stage, his mind raced with thoughts of his mother, Melania Trump. She had never sought recognition for her work, but Barron had given it to her in the most personal way possible. He had honored her not just as a public figure, but as the woman who had shaped him into the person he was. In the end, Barron Trump had done what few people expected. He had transcended the political spotlight, sharing a story that was bigger than any family name. And in doing so, he had found his own voice, one that would no longer be overshadowed by the world around him. Barron Trump's emotional speech had set the world abuzz. What started as a simple, intimate moment at NYU Stern had quickly become one of the most talked about events in recent history. Social media was flooded with reactions, with news outlets covering every angle of his words. It was as though Barron had stepped out of the shadow of his famous family and revealed himself as a young man of depth, character, and empathy. For Barron, the response was overwhelming. The weight of the applause from the crowd still lingered in his chest, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the impact of his words was only just beginning to be felt. As he left the auditorium, he was met by a small group of reporters, their microphones and cameras aimed at him. But Barron wasn't interested in the media frenzy. He had already said what needed to be said. However, the press was relentless. His speech had struck a nerve, and the world wanted more. Barron, how does it feel to be recognized for the first time as your own person, independent of your father's legacy? One reporter shouted as he approached. Barron gave a quiet nod, his face calm, but his eyes reflecting a mix of emotions. He wasn't sure how to respond to that. It had been a long time since he had been asked to step outside his family's shadow, and for the first time, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he was ready to define himself. "I appreciate the support," Barron said, keeping his voice steady. "But this was never about recognition. This was about sharing my truth, honoring my mom, and showing that we're all more than the roles people assign us." That was Barron's signature. His ability to stay composed, even when the world around him buzzed with the chaos of media attention. He had found his voice, and it wasn't for the headlines or the sound bites. It was for himself, for his family, and for those who truly understood the message he had conveyed. The reaction from social media was equally powerful. Celebrities, politicians, and even former classmates began to weigh in on Barron's words. Some were stunned, while others applauded him for being honest and vulnerable in a way few public figures ever dared. Barron Trump's speech at NYU Stern was a masterclass in emotional intelligence, tweeted one prominent journalist. A moment of pure authenticity in an era of political theater. Others took a different approach. Some conservative outlets were quick to defend Barron's family, praising him for the courage it took to speak out against the public's misconceptions. Meanwhile, liberal commentators found themselves praising Barron for showing a more human side of the Trump family, something that was often obscured by political rhetoric. In a particularly poignant moment, Melania Trump herself broke her silence on social media. "I am so proud of my son Barron for his courage and his kind heart. His words tonight were a reflection of the strength he's carried with him since he was a little boy. He has always been my greatest gift, and seeing him speak from the heart was a moment I will never forget." For Barron, his mother's words meant more than anything else. He knew that she had watched him speak with tears in her eyes, just as she had when he was a child, and she comforted him after every setback. Melania had always been his rock, and now, more than ever, he realized how much of her strength had shaped him into who he was. Back at NYU Stern, the faculty and students who had witnessed Barron's speech were still in awe. Many of them spoke about how they would remember this day as a turning point, not just for Barron but for the world. "Barron Trump just redefined what it means to be vulnerable in the public eye," said Professor Sarah Klein, who had been in the audience. "In an age where politicians and public figures rarely speak from the heart, Barron showed us what it means to be human. He showed us the importance of family, of love, and of staying true to yourself, no matter the noise around you." As the days passed, Barron received messages from all over the world. Some were from strangers who had been touched by his words, while others came from people he had never expected to hear from. A former teacher reached out to tell him how proud they were, and even former classmates shared their admiration for his bravery. And then, A letter arrived for Barron at the Trump family residence. It was from a woman in Michigan who had recently lost her mother. The letter, which Barron would later read aloud to his family, simply said, "Thank you for reminding me of the strength of a mother's love. Your words helped me understand that, no matter how hard life gets, my mom's love will always be with me. You gave me the courage to move forward, just like your mom gave you the courage to speak your truth." It was in moments like these that Barron truly understood the power of his words. It wasn't about politics or fame. It was about connecting with others on a human level, about reaching out to those who felt lost, who needed to hear that they weren't alone. As Barron reflected on the impact of his speech, he realized that he had done something far more significant than just share a personal story about his mother. He had opened a door for others to see the world through a different lens. A world where strength wasn't measured by how loudly you could shout, but by how deeply you could connect with others. He had given the world a chance to see Melania Trump as not just the former First Lady, but as a mother, a woman who had shaped him in ways that were invisible to the public eye. And in doing so, Barron had found his own voice, carving out a space for himself in a world that had often tried to define him by his last name. The world may have been stunned by his emotional speech, but Barron Trump had stunned himself most of all. He had stepped into the light, and for the first time he had truly been seen, for who he was, for who his mother had helped him become. And in that moment, Barron understood something fundamental. His legacy, just like his mother's, wasn't about the spotlight. It was about the quiet strength that defined his every action, the love that guided his choices, and the authenticity that now stood as his greatest achievement.